So it's, yeah, I'm a very hard worker and I'm very happy to be here with you today. It's really difficult to find time to do these kinds of presentations now as a full-time administrator. And so I really, really treasure the time that I have with educators and teachers like you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what we're going to be focusing on today, so the official title of the presentation is a language-based approach to content instruction for multilingual learners, and the focus will be on scaffolding in the content areas. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in so we don't waste any more time. And I'm hopeful that we're going to have some time for questions at the end, and also some time in breakout rooms. So we'll see if that will work out or not. Just a quick overview. I'm going to start by talking about a functional approach to language development. Then I'm going to go into LACI, what I call LACI. And I will provide some examples of implementation of LACI and a functional approach in an elementary and a secondary classroom with a focus on scaffolding. So to get us going, and I would love for you to type in the chat because we have quite a few people. Had you heard of a functional approach to language development before WIDA 2020? So type in the chat. What do you think this approach is? What does this approach involve? Let me see. Oh my goodness, going up too fast. Somebody asked me if I'm Brazilian. Yes, I am. With a name like Luciana de Oliveira, it's a very common name in Brazil. Everyone who knows me. So excited for this session. Okay, had not, no. Wow. Okay, well, you are all in the right place. Some of you said very little. No. Woo, kinda. Yes. Looking at language functions, language skills, etc. Okay, so you are definitely in the right session for those of you who had not heard of a functional approach before WIDA 2020. This approach makes language visible in meaningful ways and identifies language features that could be the focus of instruction for multilingual learners. So we talk about language functions and features, just like the WIDA standards do. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about WIDA and the big ideas. So you're familiar with the WIDA 2020 standards. There are 4 big ideas. Collaboration among stakeholders, integration of content and language, functional approach to language development, and equity of opportunity and access. And this is kind of a different visual representation of the 4 big ideas. Today, we're going to focus on a functional approach and LACI specifically. Our focus every day should be on equity of opportunity and access, which very much aligns with the guiding principles for Delaware. So I wanted to make that explicit connection right away. I'm going to make more explicit connections throughout the presentation. And feel free to also type up some things that you feel you're connecting with, that you have heard over there, and hopefully you can make even more connections by the end of the session. So what are some shifts in conceptualizations of language development in the WIDA standards? One of the big ideas, integration of content and language. So this is from the WIDA standards. By content language integration, we mean that multilingual learners develop content and language concurrently with academic content as a context for language learning and language as a means for learning academic content. So there is this inseparable notion here that language and content are integrated. So the shift is, instead of separating language from the learning it serves, instruction should make use of language as a vehicle for and access to learning concepts, themes, issues, and phenomena in the disciplines. Learning language and learning content occur simultaneously. And just so you know, I have been doing this work on a functional approach to language development for about 20 years. So even though a functional approach is new to WIDA and maybe new to a lot of you, it's not new in general in the world. I actually was introduced to a functional approach when I was in undergrad in Brazil in 1993. So as you can probably do the math, it's been a long time in terms of implementation and all of these things all over the world, of course, with work in Australia primarily, and a lot of work here in the US for the past 20 years. Other shifts, of course, with a functional approach to language development. So a functional approach does not focus on grammar rules, individual words or sentences, i.e. vocabulary alone, but focuses on expanding what multilingual learners can do with language. The shift, instead of viewing language as an inventory of structures, our instruction should expand students' repertoires in a variety of contexts through the years of schooling. Why is it functional? Because we have a simultaneous focus on language and meaning. Some of you may be familiar with my Focus on Grammar and Meaning book. If you went through Nigel Kaplan's program in Delaware, you read this book here. And this one is the Lacey book that arrived yesterday here at my house. My author copies arrived yesterday. So I'm really, really excited about showing this to you and making reference to a lot of the examples that I'm going to use today. So let's compare a more traditional versus a functional view of language. With traditional, we used to teach language at the sentence level. With functional, we teach language at the level of the whole text. So thinking about discourse level first, asking questions such as, what is the purpose of the text? In a traditional view of language, we were teaching language for grammatical accuracy. How many of you, when you got students' drafts, you asked students to write, you got their drafts, and you went and you identified all of the different errors, quote unquote, grammatical errors that students made? No more. We don't want to do that. This is very traditional. What we want is to teach language as a system of choices in context to expand students' language toolkit. For traditional, structures or vocabulary first. So there was a lot of pre-teaching of vocabulary words. We don't want to pre-teach vocabulary words. And this is typically where I get a lot of questions from teachers. So we're going to talk more about that and why it is problematic to take words out of context and teach them out of context. What we want to do is focus on context first. purpose, topic, roles and relationships, and mode or channel of communication. In a traditional view, we have structures without function. With a functional view, we have function first. We ask questions such as, how is language used in this text? How do adjectives help build this argument? How does passive voice help construct voice in history texts? Actually, passive voice is extremely useful in history. And a lot of times we've been advised, oh, no passive voice. Tell students not to use passive voice in their writing, etc. But it's very, very useful. How do action verbs, what we call processes, construct series of events in narratives? So several questions that focus on the function. The functional approach helps empower students to do more things with language, not just to produce correct sentences. I know I'm going fast, but there's a lot to cover in an hour and a half. Some key ideas of a functional approach. It enables a focus on meanings. It provides a meta language for talking about the meanings in the choices authors make. It enables teachers to identify language patterns in order to help multilingual learners see how language works. And that's why it's really, really important to focus on whole texts and not individual words or even just sentences. Can be implemented in any language and content area classroom. Is especially important for multilingual learners as they develop their linguistic repertoires, and is based on a theory of language that is called systemic functional linguistics. And if you would like to read more about this, I'm showing you a reference, the Oliveira and Westerland. So I wrote a piece with Luciana Westerland when she was still working at WIDA. And it's available online through the Journal of English Learner Education. And it's freely accessible. And it's called A Functional Approach to Language Development. Other key ideas. This approach supports the development of academic language, or the language used for schooling purposes, as existing on the same continuum and emerging from the same repertoire as everyday language used for communicative purposes in everyday life. It highlights that using academic language includes a process of making academic dimensions of subject matter transparent. It emphasizes that educators need to be knowledgeable about the language in and through which they're teaching. And it shows how bridging between everyday and academic languages is essential for understanding content. It also draws on the notion of genre. This approach differs significantly from process-oriented approaches common in many classrooms, such as Lucy Calkin's writing workshop. And hopefully by the end of the session, you can see how it's different. So why genre? Why do we want to focus on genre? So I took this, I cropped it out of the WIDA standards. It's from page 354. So I'm going to read it to you to provide clear guidance to diverse stakeholders in a changing educational landscape. WIDA has used the 2020 edition as an opportunity to clarify and renew the theoretical foundations of the WIDA ELD standards framework. The 2020 edition leverages a functional theoretical approach to language development, more specifically to a variant of genre theory popularized for use in K-12 schools. in particular by electing to organize the 2020 edition around high leverage genre families, most prominent in content area standards, and you see a familiar name right there cited. WIDA is prompting K-12 educators to attend to language development in a clear and systematic way during content learning, as well as to prioritize language as a meaning-making resource, as opposed to a static inventory of rules and structures. The 2020 edition provides educators with resources to explicitly teach language in a way that enhances learning in disciplinary contexts. Continuing why genre, in the 2020 edition, WIDA organizes the ELD standards framework through what they call key language uses: narrate, inform, explain, and argue. Prominent genre families selected through a systematic analysis of academic content standards, disciplinary practices, and the literature. This reorientation of the key language uses aligns with de Oliveira's multi-year analysis of genre expectations found in state content standards for English language arts, mathematics, social studies, and science. De Oliveira's analysis describes the development of key genres, including narrating, informing, explaining, and arguing, using theoretical alignment with the Sydney School architecture found in systemic functional linguistics, and more specifically, genre theory. So, and then it continues. The integration of genre theory into the key language uses organizes them into genre families and more clearly foregrounds purpose for language use as a key variable among contextual factors that influence language choices and bring to the forefront students' authentic needs to accomplish various social and instructional purposes and academic purposes. So the integration then of genre theory into this notion of key language uses organizes them as genre families. So we go into a lot more detail when we talk about genre or genres. This is also from the WIDA standards. I have a different visual representation that's a little bit more accessible, which is this. So key language uses as genre families. We have narrate. This KLU represents experiences through stories and histories, real or imagined. And there are a few examples here on the right side of your screen. Inform, convey factual information about a concept or a phenomenon or a topic. It includes reports, different kinds of reports. Explain gives accounts for how and why things work. And that includes explanations. Argue, justify one's claims using evidence and reasoning. So arguments here, such as book reviews, one or two sided arguments, etc. So this is how the WIDA standards organize the genre families into these four. Okay. Let me see if there are questions in the chat. Oh, nice. Somebody took a photo. It's not PSYOP. This is not PSYOP. Let's just clarify. I don't know if there was a question about that or at what point this was written on the chat box, but this is not PSYOP. Okay. Questions or comments so far? Let's put it on the chat box. Yes. So can you address the reasoning behind not teaching vocabulary before teaching the text? I always thought this was allowing the access to the text. It's not. It's not very helpful for English learners. And why might that be not helpful? First of all, you are pulling single words out of the context in which they appear. So that's a very traditional way of viewing language. So you're pulling things out of the text without the context, right? So really what we want is to define words in language chunks. So with a functional approach, we are looking at language chunks more than single words. There may be some times when you are going to focus on single words, but always in relation to bigger concepts. So I have an entire article that I co-wrote with some of my WIDA colleagues that I can make available to you all about why pre-teaching vocabulary is not helpful for our English learners. And that's specifically important when we talk about a functional approach versus a traditional approach to language development, which again, we're moving towards more of a functional approach, looking at whole texts, looking at vocabulary words in larger chunks, language chunks, in the context of the texts that they appear. So it's really, really important to be thinking about those things. Helpful if the vocabulary words are connected to cognates in L1. Absolutely, do it in the context of the text. Not pulling them out and doing those, vocabulary walls and things like that. Not very helpful. Out of context. We don't want out of context. We want in the context of texts. Okay. Yes, I'm going to give you several examples, and this is not a vocabulary presentation. So I have another presentation that's all about teaching through language that goes beyond vocabulary. And I'm happy to share some ideas at the end of the presentation if we have some time. But I'm going to go ahead and continue, and hopefully by the end of the session, this notion of teaching vocabulary in the context of the text will be clearer. So what is a language-based approach to content instruction? So LACI, what I call LACI, is a teacher preparation model developed over the past 20 years of research in content area classrooms. It's grounded on research in classrooms with teachers of multilingual learners. We focus on the language demands of schooling, or what I call the C of code breaking, and 6 C's of support for scaffolding. LACI provides teachers with ways of scaffolding instruction for multilingual learners in meaningful ways through implementation of a functional approach to language development. So LACI is a functional approach to language development. So to give you a better idea of what LACI is, this is a visual representation of a language-based approach to content instruction, and it's around what I call 6 C's of support for scaffolding. So we start with the C of connection. Pedagogy and curriculum are connected to students' backgrounds and experiences. There is the C of culture. Cultural and linguistic resources of multilingual learners are used to support academic learning as they develop new resources to participate in new situations. There's the C of code breaking, explicitly teaching ways of doing school with a focus on development of academic language, integrate language and content as inseparable instructional components. So the C of code breaking really relates to the WIDA's big idea of integration of language and content, right? And of course, with code breaking, there's very much a focus on a functional approach to language development as well. Then there's the C of challenge. Classroom goals and activity explore higher order thinking and reasoning. High challenge and high academic standards and content are maintained for multilingual learners. So what we want is what we call high challenge, high support classrooms, okay? Then there's the C of community and collaboration. Multilingual learners have opportunities for collaboration and engagement as part of communities of learners. And the C of classroom interactions. Classroom interactions focus on interactional scaffolding, using of oral discourse to prompt elaboration, build academic literacy, and move the learning forward. So typically you may think about scaffolds as things that you do prior to a lesson or that you integrate into a lesson that are more tangible things. And this notion of classroom interactions really draws on what we call interactional scaffolding, which is the scaffolding that happens in the moment of teaching. And there are several what we call interactional scaffolding moves that are really, really important for our multilingual learners. So the 6 C's really is a planning tool for you as teachers. I see here as a survey to engage the students' understanding about each one of them. So this is somewhat related to CLIL. CLIL is one of the approaches to content-based instruction. So you can think about content-based instruction as a continuum, and CLIL and CBI are typically focused on language classrooms. Specifically, CBI is for language classrooms. What LACI is a framework to prepare teachers to plan instruction with a focus on these scaffolding elements for our multilingual learners. Again, it's a tool for teachers planning and a teacher preparation model. So when I'm working with teachers, and I'll give you several resources today, we have different ways to plan instruction, to draw on the C of connection. How are you, the teacher, how are you going to connect what is going on in the classroom, your lesson, to students' backgrounds and experiences? Maybe something related to what it is that they have done in the classroom already, connection to a previous lesson or previous content. Culture is a type of connection, but I highlight it as a separate C because I really feel like culture needs to be a separate component of this teacher education framework, so that we are always thinking about how to draw on the resources that students bring to the classroom. Really is an asset-based approach to content instruction, right? And thinking about how to draw on the C of culture. Code breaking activities are all the kinds of things that you do with language in the content classroom. So many of you are ESOL specialists, you may be bilingual specialists. We may have some content area teachers in the audience here today who are responsible for teaching mathematics, science, social studies, English language arts. And so each C may be thought of as in different ways. If you are, an ESOL specialist, and if you are a content teacher, right? Responsible for teaching math and science. The idea is that we are integrating language and content as inseparable components. So whether you're focusing on teaching mathematics, what is the attention to language that you are going to provide to your students in a math classroom? Okay, so that's really what the whole point of thinking about code breaking as a sea of support. There was a question like word games. So word games could be as part of the sea of code breaking, but again, code breaking is more of a general term. So it's a sea of support for scaffolding, thinking about all of the different language related activities that you are going to be doing in your classroom, you know, focusing on academic language. So explicitly teaching ways of doing school with a focus on development of academic language. And so this is really at the core of Lacey, is this notion of code breaking, that you are focusing on academic language beyond vocabulary. And you're focusing on different genres of schooling, as I mentioned before, right? So thinking about a functional approach. So code breaking is a primary way for you to implement a functional approach in the classroom. So hopefully that became a little bit clearer. Yes, connectors, cohesive devices, all of those things are part of code breaking. So how does this connect to the Delaware guiding principles? I would say that the guiding principles are the what we are doing or we should be doing, and Lacey is the how. How are we going to put these principles in practice? So we know all educators share responsibility for high quality grade level instruction. So that means we share responsibility. It's not going to be only the ESOL or bilingual specialist's responsibility to teach multilingual learners, but it's everybody. That's why, you know, with Lacey, we're preparing all teachers to work with multilingual learners. And again, with the framework to plan instruction for multilingual learners, that really can be applied by all teachers. Asset-based and culturally relevant. All educators design culturally linguistically responsive learning environments that draw on student language and cultural assets. Which sea of support does this mostly align with? I would say with both the sea of connection and the sea of culture, right? Because we're drawing on what students bring to the classroom and adding while they develop new resources, right? Rigorous grade level opportunities to learn. All educators integrate language and literacy development within all disciplines. This is exactly what Lacey was designed for all educators. And again, the integration of language and content. And why focus on rigorous grade level opportunities? We don't want to simplify instruction for our multilingual learners. That is also a very traditional way of viewing language and viewing the capability of our multilingual learners. We are not going to simplify texts. We're going to use grade level texts with our students. It could be a paragraph, could be a larger chunk of text. And of course, if we're talking about students who are newcomers, yes, you may need to use some texts that are at their level of language proficiency. But what I have seen in a lot of classrooms around the US. I've worked in California, Indiana, New York, Florida, and I'm now in Virginia. What I have seen is students who are at levels 3, 4 of English language proficiency are still getting simplified texts. We don't want that. We don't want simplification. We want amplification. Provide students with ample opportunities to do more with our students, okay? Assessment for learning. All educators use a variety of measures to continuously refine and adjust instruction to meet Delaware's content and language standards. There's no explicit C for assessment specifically, but assessment for learning should really guide your planning as you were thinking about the integration of these 6 C's of support for scaffolding. Building learners' autonomy. All educators provide scaffolded learning activities to build students' autonomy. We talk about, with Lacey and the integration of a functional approach, we talk about gradual release of responsibility, okay? So this is a very important notion that we're going to be talking about as well. So hopefully you have been able to make some connections with the guiding principles and with Lacey as a framework. This is how you do these guiding, how you apply these guiding principles in the classroom. So as part of Lacey, a major part of Lacey and of a functional approach is what we call the teaching and learning cycle. So I'm going to present to you Lacey's teaching and learning cycle. And this is a model of literacy teaching, okay, with a focus on reading and writing activities. So at the center, in the core, we have planning with the end in mind and assessment and reflection. So it really is a cycle. We start with what we call building shared knowledge of the topic. Knowledge development, student discussion for shared understanding. So you want to ensure that you're building students' knowledge of the topic. And this could take a variety of forms, but you should design activities to build knowledge on a topic through reading, research, experiences, videos. These are the kinds of things that you do, again, prior to going into a specific topic. Then we have what we call this phase of activity is called sustained reading and learning about language. So reading carefully selected texts and exploring the language of the texts. So this includes some of what we've been talking about in terms of vocabulary activities. Other language learning activities would come into sustained reading phase. And I talk about it in the Lacey book and also in other publications I've had. We talk about looking at content, relationships, and organization. And we have different areas of meaning. These 3 areas of meaning, we have different language, a different language focus for each one of them. But as we are using language, we're always expressing some kind of content. We're always building relationships with our use of language, what I call enacting a relationship with the reader or the listener. And we're always organizing information in some way. Okay, so you can tell today, for example, I'm presenting you with some kind of content through this presentation, right? A functional approach, Lacey, planning instruction, etc. I'm also building relationships in how I talk to you. I draw on your knowledge base, right? things like that. And I'm always also organizing this information in some way, right? So I started with an overview, then I went on to explain or to connect to your own experiences with the functional approach. Then I talked a little bit about the WIDA standards and the big shifts. So I organized this presentation in some way, right? So that's the same thing for when we have texts that we want to explore with students. There are several different activities that can be done for sustained reading, and I'm going to provide some examples at the end of the presentation. So again, we are planning activities to focus students on key paragraphs and exploring language patterns beyond vocabulary. Then we do what we call deconstruction. And that's when you are going to select a text in the genre that students are going to be writing. Okay, and I separate deconstruction from sustained reading, because, you know, reading activities can take one form. This deconstruction really should be focusing on the specific genre that you want your students to write in. Okay, so there's teacher modeling and student learning about the language of the text. So you guide students in reading and talking to learn about the organization and language of the text. Then we have what we call joint construction or guided practice. And this perhaps is somewhat new to you. So joint construction is when the teacher and students build a text together as a class. So this is a critical phase of the teaching and learning cycle. We want to teach writing, not just assess writing. If you move from sustained reading, so you do some kind of reading activity with your students, and then you give students a prompt and have them write, you are not really teaching writing. You are assessing what students already know how to do with writing. So it's really important to focus on deconstruction and joint construction. With joint construction, the teacher is in front of the room guiding the writing. Okay. The teacher and students write a text together as a class and discuss language choices needed for this text and context. And this is a wonderful activity for vocabulary development, right? In the context of building this text together. So you can address language patterns, language chunks, including vocabulary, in sustained reading, in the deconstruction phase, and in the joint construction, because we are talking about language choices, right? Language choices that we're making to build this text together as a class. I would recommend, if you would like to learn more about joint construction, just Google Nigel Kaplan with a C. So Kaplan with a C, joint construction. And Nigel has a great blog, I think it is. And he talks a lot about joint construction because that's actually that was actually part of his dissertation research at the University of Delaware a few years ago. And so if you're interested in joint construction, I would highly recommend some of those resources. Collaborative construction is a phase of activity that I added to the Lacey's teaching and learning cycle, and it's what we call shared practice. I worked a lot with elementary school teachers, and we felt that going from joint construction to independent construction, especially for students in the lower grades, was a little bit of a push. So we wanted to have students collaborate with each other and work in pairs or groups So we added what we call this phase of activity here to the teaching and learning cycle called collaborative construction. And that's when you can pair or group students to collaboratively write together. And I have an article out with one of my former doctoral students that is about collaborative writing. It's also in that same journal that I talked about before. So if you just Google collaborative writing, Jones and de Oliveira, so make sure you use the correct spelling of my last name, it should pop up as the first choice on a Google search. But we can add some links at the end of the presentation if time allows. Okay. Then we have independent construction or independent practice. So that's when students write on their own. So students then write independently. The teacher provides support on the targeted language features. So you can see here, hopefully, that with this teaching and learning cycle, this is a very much a scaffolded model of reading and writing instruction with what we call gradual release of responsibility towards students' autonomy, which is the last principle, I think, that we talked about as the guiding principles in Delaware. So this is a wonderful way to organize instruction for our multilingual learners. Okay, so we have a few questions from the chat. Hopefully I'll address some of them as we go through. In terms of timing, yes, this is more time consuming than going from sustained reading to independent construction. But guess what? Your students are going to be much better prepared for the writing task if you do something like this in the classroom. And you don't have to, again, like I said before, correct students' grammar errors. That's a very traditional approach to language development. What you're really going to do by the time that you get your students to independent construction is really focusing more on content, organization, things of that nature. So what this does is actually it saves you time in the end. It seems like a lot, but it does save you time. Going too fast. So this is just a visual representation of Lacey's teaching and learning cycle with the C's of support kind of integrated around the phases of the TLC, with code breaking and classroom interactions at the center, because that's really what we're always going to be thinking about. In terms of implementing the teaching and learning cycle, it's a very student-centered way of thinking about focusing on students' assets and needs through the 6 C's of support. We are developing students' content knowledge. This is a culturally and linguistically sustaining approach to content instruction with the 6 C's of support planning tools that I'm going to share at the end of the presentation. There is explicit and guided instruction by the teacher with targeted supports through modeling and intentionality and formative assessments. And what we already mentioned, the gradual release of responsibility. We are teaching writing, not just assessing writing. And writing is taught through joint construction with the teacher, and students engage in collaborative and independent construction. The principle that we use for implementing the teaching and learning cycle is guidance through interaction in the context of shared experiences. So we want students to have shared experiences that they can write about. So think about your content knowledge development, what it is that you are doing to support students in the classroom to learn more about the content that they're going to write about. That really needs to be a shared experience. What is it that you are doing with them to support their content knowledge development? And guidance through interaction, because it really is in the moment of interaction that you are supporting students to do more and say more and do more with language. Okay, so it is through the interactional scaffolding moves that you're going to provide that kind of support. And talking about scaffolding, so there is this way of thinking about planned and interactional scaffolding that I'm drawing from. So there are certain things that you plan for. For example, using students' prior knowledge and experience. So connecting to what students already know. Selection and sequencing of tasks. So providing a logical sequence in which in-depth understanding of challenging concepts occurs within the appropriate context. Participant structures, changing the organizational structure within a unit. So individual, pair, group work really depends on the learning purposes of the task. Semiotic systems and message abundance. So using various visual, oral, tactile supports, and these are several examples, they create what we call message abundance and ensuring students' access to information by language-bound and non-linguistic means. Using mediational texts, so selecting and integrating any instrumental texts around which significant talk occurs and which serve as ways to link prior and future learning. In developing what we call meta-linguistic and metacognitive awareness. So developing this meta-language and also reflecting on what helps students learn. So I added some of the C's on the side here. So there's the C of connection, the C of challenge, community collaboration, and code breaking. In this idea of what is planned scaffolding. Then we have interactional scaffolding. So in my work, we have found several different interactional scaffolding moves. And these are what teachers do in the moment of interaction with our multilingual learners. What they do and what they should do. Appropriation. Teachers utilize language and tools previously used, so they pick up on what students are saying and appropriate that particular language. Recapping, teachers briefly summarize the major points of the interaction. Recasting, teachers put what students say into academically appropriate discourse. Cued elicitation, teachers offer strong hints, spoken or gestural, about desired responses. So that's when you elicit, cued elicitation, something that will help students kind of get to the answer. Moving the discourse forward. This is a critical interactional scaffolding move for our students. Teachers provide students with opportunities to say more. And this is when you ask, why? What was that like? Can you tell me more about? So you are asking students to say more and do more with language. Elaboration, teachers supplement contributions with additional information. And typically is when the teacher is connecting to a personal experience, that sort of thing. That's what we call elaboration. Clarification, teachers clarify what students say. And something that we found in our work in a first grade classroom in Florida is what we call purposeful repetition. Teachers draw attention, repeat so all can hear, and provide cues to self-correct or extend thoughts. Okay, so these are some of the interactional scaffolding moves that connect to what we call classroom interactions, the C of classroom interactions in the Lacey framework. If you want to take a screenshot of this, it would be helpful because we're going to use that in the example that I'm going to provide next. And I don't know if you took a screenshot of the 6 C's of support. I can go back to the 6 C's as well. I forgot to mention it to you, but we're going to be doing an activity now for that. So I'm going to draw on this research study that I did in Florida that focused on scaffolding in the classroom with a focus on Lacey 6 C's of support, classroom interactions, and the teaching of genre-based writing. So just very briefly, it was a first grade classroom in Florida. Here's information about the teacher, the students. We used several data sources and we focused on classroom instruction guided by Lacey 6 C's of support and implementation of the teaching and learning cycle. The mediational text that Ms. Cabana used was Last Stop on Market Street. Does anybody know Last Stop on Market Street? It's a great book about CJ, and CJ goes with his Nana to a soup kitchen, and his feelings change as they are in the bus and going through several stops and in thinking about his experiences until he gets to the soup kitchen. It's a wonderful book. So for setting context or building knowledge of the topic, Ms. Cabana asked students about their personal experiences related to visiting family members. Has anyone gone away to visit a family member? And she introduced the focal text with a picture walk. I want everyone to look at the cover of Last Stop on Market Street. And I want you to notice all the details that you see in this cover. I want you to think, what is going on in this picture? For sustained reading, she asked students to complete a graphic organizer and discuss it, exploring the image-text relationships throughout the story to better understand how CJ's feelings changed as the story progressed. So as I'm going to read this to you, I need some volunteers. I need Carolina. I need student 2, student 3, and student 4. And you can just unmute your microphone to help me out because we don't have a lot of time to wait. So just feel free to unmute and help us out. As we are reading, I identified some things here that represent the 6 C's of support. And if it's something that we call classroom interactions, I would love for you to identify the interactional scaffolding move that you think the teacher is using. Is it moving the discourse forward, clarification, purposeful repetition, etc.? Okay, so that's why we needed the screenshot of the interactional scaffolding moves. Okay, so I'm going to start. Carolina, do you want to share the action that you found?
CJ pushed Nana out of the bus.
In this illustration, who's coming out of the bus first?
CJ.
And Nana behind him. So we know from the next picture that he's pulling his Nana. If you're pulling someone and telling someone to come with you, what does that say?
That he's happy.
That you're happy and you want to get somewhere fast. Where is it that he wants to get to?
To the soup kitchen.
To the soup kitchen. So that's an action that they didn't tell us, but they showed it to us on the picture. Okay, so for time sake, I'm going to give you some of these answers. But so if you think about, do you want to share the action that you found? I saw that as part of the C of code breaking, because they were looking at different actions that were going on in the pictures and looking at image text relationships. So that's definitely part of the C of code breaking. So then CJ pushed Nana out of the bus. Who is coming out of the bus first? So Ms. Cabana asked. So that's part of the C of classroom interactions and the interactional scaffolding move of moving the discourse forward. Because Ms. Cabana could have said, okay, so who else? Pedro, what action did you find? You know, that kind of movement would have been very different from what Ms. Cabana did, which was to ask, who is coming out of the bus first? So it's moving the discourse forward because she's asking students to say more about that particular action. Then what does that say? Again, moving the discourse forward. She's again having this more extended conversation with students. Now you can see that a lot of the students are not answering like full-blown, you know, answers, but they are there engaged, and she's pushing them to say more and do more with language. Happy. That is an example of what we call purposeful repetition, because the student 3 says that he's happy, and then Ms. Cabana says that you're happy and you want to get somewhere fast. Where is it that he wants to get to? That's again moving the discourse forward. Where is it that he wants to get to? Student 4 says to the soup kitchen. Ms. Cabana goes to the soup kitchen. Again, another use of purposeful repetition. And then she ends, so that's an action that they didn't tell us, but they showed it to us on the picture. So again, making these image text connections were really, really important for this part of what we call sustained reading. And this to me is a clear example of the C of challenge. Again, it's somewhat of a challenging activity for them for the students to be thinking and doing these things right at the moment of their interaction, but it's really, really critical for our multilingual learners. Another example, so I need somebody to play Juan for me, and I will be Ms. Cabana again. And as you read through, again, I've identified some different colors here, represent different C's, and also for classroom interactions, we have the different interactional scaffolding moves. So think about those interactional scaffolding moves for me, okay? So I'm gonna be Ms. Cabana again. The story that we're going to start is Last Stop on Market Street. Before we begin, I wanted to ask you some things. First of all, has anyone gone away to visit a family member? There's Juan. Juan, who did you go visit?
My grandma
And where do they live?
in Argentina, and I'm going there this Christmas.
Oh, for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there. What do you need to take to get there? Because you live here in Florida. So what do you take to get to Argentina?
A plane.
A plane. Do you go with your whole family, or does mom and dad take you there and you stay with them for a little while by yourself?
I go with my whole family.
Okay, thank you so much. Your microphone was not quite working, but I heard, hopefully everybody else heard as well. So think about the 6 C's of support, and with classroom interactions, what interactional scaffolding moves these represent. And I'm going to check on the chat box. Okay, anybody want to try? Do you see that that's the C of connection with the first question? So has anyone gone away to visit a family member? Again, connecting to students' backgrounds and experiences. And where do they live? That's part of the C of classroom interactions and what we call moving the discourse forward. Yes? How about this, for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there? What do you think that is? That's a very interesting way. It's what we call recasting. So in this classroom, there were a lot of Jewish students. Do they celebrate Christmas? No. So the teacher recast what the student used as Christmas into holiday break. So not everybody celebrates Christmas, but everybody has a holiday break. So Ms. Cabana recast Christmas as, for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there. And then what did she do? Again, move the discourse forward. She has such wonderful ways of asking students to say more and do more with language. And again, even though the responses from these multilingual learners are kind of short, and sometimes we've had conversations about this, it's still asking them to do more with language. And I think that that's really what we want with the use of these 6 C's of support for scaffolding, is to really ask our students to say more and give them opportunities to do so. Then what we call purposeful repetition with a plane, yes. And then again, moving the discourse forward, okay? And this whole example is an example of the C of culture, because you can see here that the teacher is really drawing on students' cultures, cultural experiences, linguistic resources, all of those things through this example. I have one more. I will be Ms. Cabana again, and I need somebody to be Hugo for me. Okay, so Hugo is traveling from Miami, Florida to Brazil, which is in South America, like Nico does too. And then this time you're not only visiting your grandparents, but also your aunt and uncle. That is his tio and his tia. And sometimes you stay alone with your grandparents and your parents come back over here to work. Hugo? Somebody?
Yeah, and my aunts and uncles.
Okay, so how is that? Because I think you're the first one to say that you spend some time alone with just your grandparents and not your parents. So what was that like?
It was fun
It was fun. Why?
because I slept over with my primo.
Primo is cousin. So he was able to sleep over with his cousins. That is fun. My daughter stays over at her grandmother's too, to sleep over with her cousins a lot. And that is sometimes her favorite time. Thank you for sharing. So as you can imagine, like right before this example, when Ms. Cabana started, okay, so Hugo is traveling, what do you think happened? Hugo was sharing, like, I go to Brazil, I sleep over at my tio and tia, with my tio and tia. So you can kind of imagine that Hugo just kind of provided some of these examples, right? And then the teacher goes, okay, so Hugo is traveling from Miami, da, 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 da. We do this a lot as teachers without sometimes even realizing it, right? And this is what we call recapping. Recapping is when you summarize what students just said. Sometimes you're adding information. Sometimes you're clarifying certain things. There's a little bit of code breaking here, right? Because Hugo was using tio and tia, the words for uncle and aunt in Portuguese. And so the teacher goes, but also your aunt and uncle, that is his tio and his tia, kind of making a connection between what those words mean in Portuguese and the words in English. So there is also a little bit of code breaking happening here too. Then we have, so how is that? Clear case of classroom interactions moving the discourse forward. Again, so how is that? So what was that like? Ms. Cabana is great at doing that, and we need to do more of that in our classrooms to really ask our students to say more. Hugo says it was fun, and Ms. Cabana says it was fun. Why? Why questions, how questions, all of those are great ways to move the discourse forward. Here we have another example of purposeful repetition with it was fun. And then a little bit of more code breaking. Primo is cousin. So he was able to sleep over with his cousins. So again, the student is using this word in Portuguese, no big deal, that's great. The teacher knows these words because they're actually the same words as in Spanish, just a little bit of different pronunciation. And so then she goes on to relate to her own experience. So that's what we call elaboration. So several great examples here of interactional scaffolding moves that the teacher is using. Again, elaboration meaning you're adding your experience, you're kind of drawing what students are doing, etc. Okay. I'm going to skip this example because we don't have a lot of time, but this is a secondary example, and I'm happy to share the PowerPoint slides with you so you can have it. But this is another great example of how it's used in the classroom. Some of the materials and resources can be found using this QR code, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Well, let me give you time to use the QR code with your phones. Yes, you ask them, what does that mean? Or do you know the word in English? Or you can, you know, there are lots of different resources. If you have like maybe other students who speak that L1, yes, it's not possible to know all of your students L1s, but you can still make use of their home languages in the classroom. So these are just some examples. I think the main idea is for you not to be not tell students to not use their home languages in the classroom. So I think that having an asset-based approach to teaching multilingual learners really includes embracing what it is that they bring as language resources. Even though you may not know what, you know, what words they're saying, you can really help. You can really help your students feel comfortable.
And just to let you know, the QR code, I don't know of anyone else, but it's not working for me. It's saying it's expired or something, or exceeded a monthly limit or something. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Let me give you access. Let me share here.
I can
Is
also
that true for everybody?
I don't know, are these meant to be something that people can have permanently or?
Yeah,
Because I can
definitely.
actually download these and drop these into our Padlet under the link of your resources
Perfect.
one
Yes.
as well. Okay,
Yes,
I can
that
get those
sounds
in the next few minutes. I'll start working on that right now. And then you'll be able to
Scan
find
limit.
those in the Padlet under a column dedicated to you.
Okay, perfect. I didn't know there was a scan limit.
I didn't either.
That's interesting. I'm learning too, but you have it in the chat box here. So you should just be able to click on it and get to the resources. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that there is a planning guide. There's a lesson plan as a resource. So let me share some of these. Let me not share, but open some of these resources here and share my screen. Okay. So there's the C's, right? Oh, great. Hold on. I just closed the window. Instead of just going back. It will take me a little bit of time, but you can peruse in the meantime. These are all the resources. It also includes a book discount coupon if you're interested in the Lacey book that I showed to you at the beginning of the presentation. You're welcome to use that coupon. There is a planning guide with the 6 C's of support. So of course, this was just an intro to Lacey, an intro to a functional approach. I tried to do quite a bit in one presentation with examples and everything else, but hopefully what you can do is just use these resources. And this planning guide for incorporating the 6 C's of support, I work with the Division of Multilingual Learners in New York City DOE, which is the largest school district in the country. They've been implementing Lacey in social studies for the past 5 years. And they have found this to be really helpful, especially the planning guide that has some ideas about what to do for each C of support. There are more. So you can see here, for example, with the C of code breaking, the kinds of things you can do, the C of challenge, community and collaboration, etc. There's also a unit plan template if you're interested in implementing Lacey in the classroom to think about the 6 C's of support and also the different phases of the teaching and learning cycle. Of course, to do more with each one of the phases, I would definitely need several days of professional learning workshops with you all, but hopefully you got a little taste of what you can do in the classroom. There's also a planning tool for the Lacey's, for the teaching and learning cycle that has different possible activities for each one of the phases. And of course, I couldn't go over all of them, but you have them as a resource. They're also part of the book. And so it can be used really as a tool. And lastly, a sample lesson plan for science. This was something that my research team and I developed that really connects to the WIDA standards. It has, again, examples for each phase of the teaching and learning cycle. It has an interactive reading aloud activity. You can see here that it's planned with the 6 C's in mind. So we actually integrate the 6 C's into the lesson plan. We talk about the different word choices, etc. Again, vocabulary in context, and procedural recount genre. And again, there's lots of different resources. This is the text from a textbook that we used. This is an annotated text. So for those of you asking about how do you do vocabulary in context, this is how you do it. Okay, so you have a big text. Of course, this is for you as teachers. I don't necessarily think you need to go through all of this with your students. You can select maybe 2 or 3 key language features, but you can see here, for example, technical terms are very important. So you want to focus on the language chunk, not just one word, in the context of the text. So how do you do it? You can do it using different visuals, different organizers and things like that, and use some of the resources from the WIDA standards. There are several texts that have been annotated for you in the WIDA standards. And of course, you can do this on your own as well. Select 1 or 2 texts or paragraphs that you want to focus on with students that really target those content standards that you need to target, and go from there. Pick some language features to focus on. So I'm going to stop sharing. See if there are any questions. We have 3 minutes. Okay, so let me. Just some final then remarks, very briefly. Why are LACI and the teaching and learning cycle culturally sustaining practices? So hopefully you got a sense that LACI offers a concrete framework for planning and instruction, and the TLC offers a way to scaffold explicit writing instruction for multilingual learners. We have the C of connection, culture, so affirming linguistic and cultural diversity in your classrooms, code breaking by making language visible, so deconstructing text is one way, challenge by eliminating simplification. We need high challenge, high support classrooms. We need to provide access to grade level content, community and collaboration with engagement with each other, and classroom interactions that focus on interactional scaffolding. I'm gonna skip that. These are some resources if you want to take a photo. The first one here, planning for instruction using LACI, that has examples from a 5th grade classroom. Then a functional approach, that one is also available in the Journal of English Learner Education. For LACI, some of these examples. And here's another QR code for my book. And that's my contact information and a few of my books if you're interested in learning more. I'll stop sharing now. And it is 2:30, so I did pretty good on time. So hopefully this was an interesting session for you all and you learned a lot. I know it was a lot of information, but those of you who answered no about a functional approach, hopefully now you can say yes, you know more than you did before this session about a functional approach.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful session, jam-packed with tons and tons of amazing information.
It
Filled
was
with
a
so
lot.
much great information. Awesome. Thank you to everybody that attended. We are going to take a little bit of a break, but we're coming back at 3 o'clock if you're joining us for the Science of Reading panel, which we're super excited about. So we have a 3 o'clock session and then a networking session at 4 o'clock. I will work on putting all of those resources into the Padlet and everything that you asked for in the chat. So I will work on in this little break time, getting all of those things uploaded that aren't already there. Thank you again to Luciana de Oliveira for everything today. That was fantastic. Lots of great information. I can't wait to digest it all, to look over my notes that I was copiously writing while you were speaking today. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our participants as well for hanging in.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I'll hang on in case there are any questions.
Sucesso, Luciana.
Obrigada, Raimundo.
Sucesso para você.
Obrigada. Obrigada por participar também.
Lots of big thank yous in the chat, especially from people who've taken Nigel's course. So liking to hear a different
Yes, I saw that.
perspective.
I was like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna put a little plug for Nigel here.
So,
You have an expert in Delaware on especially joint construction, but TLC, genre, and all of that. And I love his blog, and I use it with my teacher ed candidates as well, especially for joint construction. And I cite his stuff all the time too. I keep asking him, when is more coming? Where's more coming? He's like,
yes.
I don't know.
I saw on Twitter he just put something out. I think he's got a new book out.
Yes, I just got a copy actually that they sent to me. I was not expecting that. I'm very thankful.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not on
this is
Twitter,
awesome.
but I am on Facebook, and if folks are interested, they can find me on Facebook.
Hard to keep up. I actually am only on Twitter during the conference time. I'm ashamed to admit we tend to do a lot with during the conference time, and we share a lot of things, and every once in a while I'll share something from the department, but I'm not very good at following social media.
Yeah, I do Instagram and Facebook. That's pretty much it. And LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn.
Oh, that's good.
So,
That's
yeah.
a good one.
So yeah, I am on LinkedIn. I was posting photos yesterday of the Lucy book because I just got it yesterday. So I'm still like in the, oh my God, I just got it. It's finally out. kind of
That's
phase.
exciting. I can't
Yeah.
wait to get our hands on a copy. In fact, somebody was emailing me. They're like, "Oh, I can't wait to get our hands on a copy within our department."
There
are super
is one mistake. So if you do get a copy, I'll let you know what the mistake is. It's in one of the tables, but for some reason I missed it in the gazillion times that